No one saw it coming, but not the politicians, not the press, not even the people inside Downing Street. But with just 26 words, King Charles may have just ended Keir Starmer's career. No press conference, no angry speech, just one royal statement that hit harder than any political scandal in decades. And if you think the British monarchy doesn't still hold power, what's unfolding right now will make you question everything you thought you knew about modern Britain. It started quietly. Too quietly. Late Sunday evening, a brief comment by Prime Minister Keir Starmer began circulating online. At first, it seemed harmless, a sarcastic remark about outdated traditions and royal privileges during a routine press Q&A. But within hours, the tone changed. Reporters picked up on it, headlines twisted it, and suddenly it wasn't a joke anymore. It was an insult to the crown. And in a country where respect for the monarchy runs deep, Starmer had just stepped into dangerous territory. By Monday morning, whispers began to spread through Westminster. The king is not pleased, one insider reportedly said. Another source described the atmosphere in Buckingham Palace as cold, focused, and unusually tense. Behind those ancient walls, something was brewing. Something far bigger than a political spat. While most politicians brushed it off as gossip, the palace was already preparing its response. That night, King Charles summoned his closest advisors. No cameras, no leaks, at least not immediately. The meeting took place inside the private study of Buckingham Palace with just a handful of people present, the Lord Chamberlain, senior constitutional advisors and 2 members of the Privy Council. One person who later spoke under anonymity described the scene as eerily calm. But the king's words, anything but. The crown, he said, must not be mocked, not by those sworn to protect it. Those 13 words sent a chill through the room. And within hours, the ripples reached Downing Street. Starmer's communications team scrambled to contain the fallout, insisting that his remarks had been taken out of context. But by then, it was too late. The story had taken on a life of its own. Newspapers, talk shows, and social media exploded with royal drama. Hashtags like hashtag respect the crown and hashtag Charles strikes back trended worldwide. Meanwhile, the king stayed silent, and that silence was deafening. No denial, no clarification, just a void filled with speculation. Was the monarchy about to make a move? Would the palace finally respond to a sitting prime minister's criticism? And then, on Tuesday morning, it happened. The royal household issued an official statement, only 26 words long, yet it hit like a thunderclap across the political world. His Majesty remains steadfast in his duty to preserve national unity and expects mutual respect between all institutions of the United Kingdom. No names were mentioned, but everyone knew who those words were meant for. The message was clear. The king had drawn a line and Starmer had crossed it. Almost immediately, the reaction was volcanic. Political commentators called it the most direct royal rebuke in modern British history. Even veteran journalists admitted they had never seen anything like it. Social media turned into a battlefield. Half of Britain praised the king for defending the monarchy's dignity, while the other half demanded Starmer explain himself, but the damage was already done. Inside Downing Street, chaos reigned. Advisors argued over strategy. Some urged an apology, others wanted to fight back. But Starmer, stubborn and furious, refused to bow. "I'm the elected leader," he reportedly said during a closed-door meeting, "not his subject." That one sentence leaked within hours, and it only made things worse. By Tuesday night, the King's statement had ignited a national conversation about the monarchy's true power. Could a few carefully chosen words from the palace really destabilise the government? The answer was becoming painfully clear. Royal experts began discussing Operation Sovereign Integrity, a rumoured constitutional review initiated by the King's advisors to examine the monarchy's rights in times of political crisis. If true, it meant the palace wasn't just reacting, it was preparing for something bigger. News anchors called it the palace versus... Parliament protesters gathered outside Buckingham Palace holding signs that read, "Defend the Crown." Church bells rang in solidarity. Even international outlets started covering the unfolding crisis. CNN called it a constitutional storm in Britain. And yet, through all of it, King Charles remained calm, poised, and unshakably silent. Every photo of him smiling at public events, only amplified the sense of control. Do you think, as if he knew exactly what he was doing? And maybe he did, because behind that silence was a strategy no one could see coming. But what exactly was the king planning next? Would he use his constitutional powers to intervene? Or was this all just psychological warfare against the government? By midweek, the political earthquake had spread far beyond London. What started as a few sharp words had turned into a full-blown national crisis. Inside the corridors of power, one question echoed everywhere. How far will the king go? The Prime Minister's team, once confident and composed, now looked like a sinking ship in slow motion. Ministers avoided the cameras, party spokespeople stumbled through awkward interviews, and the entire government seemed paralysed. Every newspaper headline screamed the same thing: Crown versus Commons. Behind closed doors, Buckingham Palace was running like a well-oiled machine. No panic, no leaks, only purpose. Senior aides worked quietly on what insiders referred to as a constitutional safeguard review, though the public didn't yet know it had a code name: Operation Sovereign Integrity. Its purpose was simple but terrifying for Downing Street: to identify every possible constitutional measure the monarchy could legally take if a Prime Minister's behaviour was deemed a threat to national stability. No British leader had ever dared push the crown to this point, and yet somehow Keir Starmer had. By Wednesday morning, sealed envelopes began arriving at key institutions. One went to the Speaker of the House of Commons, another to the Leader of the Opposition, and a third, mysteriously so, to the Lord Chief Justice. None of the letters were made public, but whispers spread like wildfire. One political journalist claimed the letters contained a firm reminder of the constitutional limits of government authority. Another described them as a royal warning, polite but impossible to ignore. Within hours, the contents had leaked in fragments online and the internet went wild. The King Strikes Back trended again, this time joined by a new one: Respect the Crown. Millions of Britons reposted the statement, memes flooded Twitter, and political TikTok accounts began analysing every syllable of the King's 26-word declaration as if decoding a secret code. Across the country, public sentiment began shifting rapidly. For once, the monarchy was being seen not as a passive symbol, but as a living power, silent, elegant, and formidable. Meanwhile, the Prime Minister was losing grip on everything. Inside Number 10, the tension was unbearable. Advisors pleaded with him to make peace, issue an apology, clarify his words, show humility. But Starmer refused. His pride had turned into his downfall. According to one source inside the Cabinet Office, he slammed his desk and shouted, "If I apologise now, I'll look weak, and I won't give him that satisfaction." It was the statement that sealed his fate, because outside those walls, the public had already chosen their side, and it wasn't his. Crowds started gathering near Buckingham Palace with flags, banners, and chants of support for the king. "Stand with the crown," they shouted. It was as if the monarchy had suddenly reawakened a sleeping loyalty deep within the British soul. The imagery was haunting. Thousands waving Union Jacks under the palace gates while Starmer's face flickered on massive TV screens, defensive and visibly shaken. Even Labour strongholds in the north saw small vigils in support of the monarchy. International media joined the frenzy. CNN called it a masterclass in quiet power. France's Le Monde ran a headline reading, "The King speaks without speaking." In Canada and Australia, government officials reaffirmed their loyalty to the crown. Diplomatic language, but everyone knew it was another jab at Starmer's recklessness. The global narrative had shifted. Britain wasn't witnessing a scandal, it was witnessing a historic reckoning. By Thursday morning, polls confirmed what everyone already suspected. Public trust in Starmer had collapsed. His approval rating dropped faster than anyone thought possible. A YouGov poll found that 78% of Britons agreed the king did the right thing by defending the monarchy's dignity. Another survey showed that nearly 2/3 of Labour voters believed their own leader had gone too far. The writing was on the wall. Inside Parliament, the whispers turned into open rebellion. Several Labour MPs began discussing a leadership challenge. Even Deputy Prime Minister Angela Rayner, once Starmer's fiercest ally, reportedly confronted him in a heated cabinet meeting. Witnesses described her fury. "You've turned this into a war we can't win." The people are with the king, not with us. When she stormed out, the silence that followed was heavier than words. Everyone knew what that meant. Starmer was finished. But perhaps the most devastating blow came not from politicians, but from the king himself, without uttering another word. On Thursday afternoon, Charles attended a charity event in Edinburgh, smiling warmly for cameras, shaking hands, speaking softly. Not once did he mention politics. Yet every image of him, calm, composed, regal, became a silent contrast to Starmer's desperation. Commentators started calling it the art of quiet domination. For the first time in generations, Britain was watching the monarchy flex its invisible power, not through commands or decrees, but through moral authority and public perception. The crown was no longer just a symbol, it was a weapon of influence. And Keir Starmer, in all his arrogance, had handed it to the king on a silver platter. The only question now was, how far would Charles take it? Would he stop at public humiliation? Or was the stage being set for something far more unprecedented? Because what happened next would push Britain to the edge of a constitutional crisis. And it all began with a single royal invitation. By Friday morning, Britain had entered uncharted territory. Newspapers across the country carried the same haunting headline: "The Crown responds, the government trembles." The once confident Prime Minister was now fighting for political survival, surrounded by advisers who no longer believed he could win. Downing Street, usually a fortress of order and control, had turned into a battlefield of panic and betrayal. Ministers whispered in corridors, aides leaked private conversations, and senior officials began quietly reaching out to palace contacts. It was no longer about politics, but it was about damage control before the monarchy made its next move. And then came the real shocker. Early Friday afternoon, Buckingham Palace issued a short, carefully worded statement. His Majesty has been fully briefed on current developments and remains committed to the preservation of constitutional order. Just one sentence, yet it hit Westminster like a thunderbolt. That phrase, preservation of constitutional order, wasn't random. It was royal code. The kind of language used only in moments of national instability. Political historians immediately began dissecting it on live television. What did it mean? Was the king preparing to intervene directly? Did he intend to dissolve Parliament? No one knew, but everyone felt the weight of what was coming. Inside Labour headquarters, despair turned into rebellion. Leaked recordings from a late-night emergency meeting revealed shouting matches between senior members. Some demanded Starmer step aside. Others argued that surrendering now would hand total victory to the monarchy. The party that once prided itself on unity was now imploding from within. One MP was reportedly heard saying, "He's turned us into enemies of the crown. We'll never recover from this." Another responded bitterly, "If he doesn't resign soon, the king won't have to say a word. The people will finish him for good." Meanwhile, outside Westminster, the mood in Britain was electric. Crowds gathered near Buckingham Palace in numbers not seen since Queen Elizabeth's funeral. Union flags covered the gates and spontaneous chants broke out across London. "God save the King!" Churches held prayer vigils for the stability of the nation. Even in northern cities like Liverpool and Manchester, where Republican sentiment had occasionally surfaced, citizens publicly condemned Starmer's arrogance. The mood was no longer divided. It was united under one banner. Respect for the monarchy. Foreign governments couldn't look away either. The White House released a carefully neutral statement urging respect for Britain's internal processes. But even that couldn't hide the global fascination with what was unfolding. In France, political commentators called it a masterclass in constitutional dominance. In Canada, Parliament passed a symbolic motion reaffirming loyalty to the Crown. The message was clear, but the world was siding with the King. Starmer, cornered and visibly exhausted, tried one last desperate move. Late Friday night, he appeared on live television, his voice shaky but defiant. He claimed that the monarchy should not influence elected government and insisted that his comments had been misinterpreted. But it was too late. Every word he spoke only deepened the divide. Within minutes, social media erupted in fury. Hashtags like #Starmer must go and #Crown over Commons dominated global trends. Memes mocked his televised apology attempts, while side-by-side clips compared his nervous tone to the King's composed silence. By Saturday morning, his leadership was on life support. Cabinet members began resigning one by one. First the Home Secretary, then the Health Minister, then two junior ministers in rapid succession. Each resignation letter cited a loss of confidence in the Prime Minister's judgment. It was political collapse in slow motion. Even journalists who had defended Starmer for years began calling for his resignation. The Prime Minister, one wrote in The Guardian, has not just lost control of his party, he's lost the moral authority to govern. And yet, through it all, King Charles did not utter another word. He didn't need to. Every public appearance and every image of him greeting citizens, every handshake, every smile spoke louder than any speech could. The King's silence had become the most powerful message in Britain. Royal aides began calling it the calm storm. He didn't confront chaos. He simply waited for it to consume itself. By Sunday afternoon, the situation was unsustainable. Parliament was preparing for an emergency session. Senior Labour MPs began quietly drafting letters of no confidence. Television networks prepared for breaking news alerts at any moment. Political analysts predicted that the King might soon be advised to consider constitutional action, perhaps even a caretaker government if the crisis deepened. And through every speculation, one fact remained clear: the monarchy, often dismissed as ceremonial, had just reminded the world that power can still be exercised without shouting, without speeches, and without a single visible command. The entire nation now held its breath. Would King Charles finally intervene? Would he dissolve Parliament, forcing Britain into an early election, or would he simply sit back and let Starmer's government collapse under its own weight? Because in just a few hours, Britain would get its answer, and the fallout would change everything. By Monday morning, the air in London felt heavier. The kind of silence that comes before history changes course. The gates of Downing Street, once buzzing with ministers and aides, now stood guarded and empty. The corridors inside were lined with boxes, files being packed, staff whispering quietly as if mourning something that hadn't officially died yet. Keir Starmer, the man who had promised stability, now sat alone in his office, watching the news that spoke of his downfall in real time. He didn't need a resignation letter to know his government was already over. At 9 a.m, Buckingham Palace made its move. A discreet black car arrived at Westminster, carrying a sealed envelope addressed to the Speaker of the House of Commons. The document inside contained only one line: His Majesty has been apprised of the current situation and will consult with the Privy Council in due course. Simple, formal, but the meaning was crystal clear. The King was stepping in. It wasn't a command, it didn't have to be. It was the signal that the palace was ready to act if the government could not restore order. Within an hour, chaos broke loose. Television screens across the UK filled with breaking news banners. Royal consultation underway. Reporters camped outside Windsor Castle. Journalists speculated about a possible caretaker government, and legal experts debated whether the King might invoke his reserve powers. Those ancient rights monarchs rarely use, but never truly lose. It was a constitutional drama unseen in modern times, and the world couldn't look away. Inside Labour Party headquarters, panic turned to resignation. Angela Rayner, Rachel Reeves, and senior backbenchers had already begun drafting plans for a leadership transition. It's over, one MP admitted to the Beat. We can't fight the Crown and the country at the same time. Even Starmer's closest allies had stopped defending him publicly. Opinion polls were devastating. 82% of Britons said they supported the King's handling of the crisis, while fewer than 20% believed Starmer should remain in office. That afternoon, as Parliament convened for what would become one of the most watched sessions in decades, the Prime Minister entered the chamber to an icy silence. Gone were the cheers, the laughter, the confidence. The man who had once stood as a symbol of authority now looked like a figure walking toward his political execution. Across the aisle, opposition MPs sat in grim satisfaction, while even members of his own party avoided eye contact. The Speaker called the session to order, and before the Prime Minister could speak, the Leader of the Opposition stood and submitted a formal motion, a vote of no confidence in the government of Keir Starmer. Gasps filled the chamber. The motion was accepted. The debate that followed was brutal, One MP after another condemned Starmer's reckless disrespect, failed leadership, and unforgivable arrogance. Cameras caught him sitting motionless, eyes fixed on the floor. When his turn came to respond, he rose slowly and spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. I acted in the belief that modern Britain could move forward without old hierarchies, he said, but perhaps I misunderstood the meaning of respect. Those words, intended to sound dignified, only deepened the silence. It was the sound of defeat. By evening, the results of the no confidence vote were in, and the verdict was crushing. The motion passed by a landslide. The government had fallen. Crowds outside Parliament erupted, not in protest, but in cheers. Bells rang across cities, and in front of Buckingham Palace, thousands gathered with flags and banners reading God save the King. For the first time in modern memory, the monarchy had effectively ended a government without ever breaking a single law or uttering a single direct order. The Crown had spoken, not through power, but through patience. As the news spread, world leaders sent their official reactions. The White House expressed respect for the British constitutional process. European leaders praised the stability of the monarchy. Even the Commonwealth nations issued statements reaffirming their loyalty to the Crown. The global message was unified. Britain may have been shaken, but its monarchy stood taller than ever. That night, Keir Starmer addressed the nation from the steps of Downing Street. His face was pale, his voice trembling, the cameras capturing every flicker of regret. It has been the honour of my life to serve this country, he said, but I can no longer do so effectively. Therefore, I have informed His Majesty of my intention to resign. The door behind him closed for the last time, and the lights of number 10 memmmed. Across the city, cheers echoed through the streets. And what of King Charles? He said nothing. He didn't need to. The next morning, he appeared at Windsor Castle, calm and composed, meeting with the Privy Council as if nothing extraordinary had happened. But every newspaper in the world carried the same headline, "The King Who Spoke Without Speaking." This wasn't just a political downfall, it was a historic shift. The monarchy, once dismissed as ceremonial, had reasserted its quiet authority. The balance of power in Britain had changed, not through force or decree, but through the unshakable weight of respect. And now one question remains. After witnessing a king silently topple a government, will any future prime minister ever dare to challenge the crown again? Or has King Charles just rewritten the rules of power for an entire generation?